This one.
And this like one to be so convoluted and turgid.
This is right.
You can put your head up on the ceiling. Easy to understand as a.
I don't know. Yeah, he can get away with it. I don't know if I should.
Sure, you wish I could remember the name of that guy. I'm always.
I brought a pen.
That's not good. Very flimsy.
From
It's much better. I think it's supposed to be handheld.
Pointing back.
The aim in writing should not be to write so that one may be understood, but so that one may not be misunderstood. And, you know, that's, yeah.
It wasn't me.
That would
Not
be
as
a
easy as
good
it
point for a lawyer.
Lawyers.
Seriously.
My father was a lawyer. It's the one thing I
Okay, we need to start, folks, because I got a bunch of stuff tonight.
I thought you started at 7:30.
It is 7.
He's late. He's 2 minutes late.
No, yes, I am.
7:29.
I want to start with really one of the most interesting people of the period.
Louder.
One of the most interesting
Thank
people
you.
of our period.
Excellent.
That would be Gwen. Sorry. I'll be quiet now.
Hilda of Whitby, also known as Hild, sometimes Hild, sometimes Hilda, both terms are used, but Hilda is more common. Firstly, what was the situation during her period? She was born in 614, died in 680. In the year 410, the Roman civil authorities in Britain sent a letter to the Emperor Honorius telling him that things were getting out of hand with all these Germanic invaders, the Saxons and all those people, and they really needed a lot more troops because he pulled a lot of troops out to deal with things on the Rhine. And he sent them a letter back that said essentially, dude, you're on your own. And the Romans never came back. So that was it. And what immediately happened, remember, Rome is still British at this point. You know, the British tribes. The whole area broke up into very small kingdoms. Most of them were about the size of a large county, but they call themselves kings. Basically, they'd gone back to a tribal clan structure almost immediately. And that was still the case when Hilda came along 200 years later. Now, the primary source, not the only source, but the primary source for information about Hilda is something called the Ecclesiastical History of the English People, which was written by Bede about 50 years after her death. He was born approximately 8 years before her death, so there's an overlap there. He documented much of the Christian conversion of the English. His work has some minor chronological confusions because he had different sources and sometimes they didn't agree, and a lot of miracle stories. But it's largely accurate, and he is in fact known as the father of English history. He was trying to write down what he could find out. So we'll talk about him later. But it was not difficult for him to get information about Hilda because she was a very, very prominent figure in her own time. She was born into the royal household of a place called Deira, which was up in what's now Yorkshire. You know, it was one of these mini kingdoms. And she was the daughter of the nephew of the king of Deira. So she was, you know, she was very well born. When Hilda was still an infant, I think she was about 2 years old, her father was sort of in exile because there'd been a revolt against him at the court of another king, the king of something called Elmet, which I'd never heard of, which is in Yorkshire. And they poisoned him. So boom, she's, you know, her father's dead, her mother's a widow. But her mother was the sister of, well, let me go back a bit. About the same year, Edwin, who was the king, Edwin was fighting alongside Redwolf of East India, and they won the battle that they needed to, and put Edwin back on his throne. So he's created the kingdom of Northumbria out of 2 or 3 of these little kingdoms, and it grew and prospered and did real well. Hilda was brought up in King Edwin's court. So this is another royal sort of princess person. In 625, Edwin, who'd become a widow, married Ethelbert of Kent, and she was the daughter of Ethelbert of Kent and his wife, the Merovingian, a Frankish Princess Bertha. Those were the couple that Augustine came to. Okay, so this is all locking together. And she was brought up as a Christian under the influence largely of Bertha. As part of Ethelbert, who married the widowed King Edwin, as part of her marriage contract, she was allowed to continue to practice Roman Christian worship. And remember, we're way up north. This is Celtic area, Celtic Christianity. And Edwin himself was not a Christian. And she was allowed to bring her chaplain, who was probably an Italian, named Paulinus. He was a monk, and he was one of the monks who had come over with Augustine. It was in the second wave when they sent the second 40 monks over. So she's now queen of this little kingdom up north, Ethelbert is, but she's continuing to practice Roman Christianity. And apparently she was pretty persuasive, or Paulinus was, because King Edwin was baptized on Easter Day, along with his entire court. Hilda was 13 at that time, and that's when she was baptized. They built a small wooden church for the occasion. We don't know exactly where it was. It was somewhere near the site of York Minster, York Cathedral, which is huge. We don't know, but this may have been the account on which, the event which prompted Paulinus to send a letter to the Pope telling him that it had taken him 30 days to baptize all the people who came forward. So, if you want to baptize a whole bunch of people, get the king first. In 633, Northumbria was overrun by the pagans from Mercia, which is another small kingdom, and King Edwin was killed. So now the royal family's got a problem. The king is dead, and here come the Mercian pagans. So they cut out for Kent, remember? Okay. And the queen, now a widow, founded a convent, and apparently Hilda remained with her. So she got a convent education. She had an older sister, and she married, she did not marry. She married the brother of the king of another small kingdom. There were just tons of them. And after she became a widow, she moved back to France, became a nun at Chelles Abbey, which is what is now a suburb of Paris.
We're talking about Ethelbert.
I'm talking about Hareswith, the sister of Hilda. So she's got an elder sister. Remember that elder sister. She became very influential too. Chelles was at that time a town out in the country. It's now a suburb of Paris. Bede picks up Hilda's story at this point. She was 33, had led a pretty austere personal life, but still, she was a court person. And she had decided she was just at the point of leaving the country to go to Paris, well, what's now Paris, to join her sister's convent. But the Bishop of Lindisfarne, Bishop Aidan, convinced her to return to Northumbria. And she did, as a nun. We don't know where her original convent was, but there, with a few companions, she learned her traditions of Celtic monasticism. Remember, she'd been Roman. And after a year there, Aidan appointed Hilda as the second abbess of Hartlepool Abbey. Again, we don't have any remains of that abbey, but its monastic cemetery has been found, but not any ruins at all. It's in County Durham, so that's south of Yorkshire. In 657, she founded an abbey. We know it as Whitby. That's the later name of the town it's near. And thank goodness we do, because the original name was StA&StM, which I don't think I could say more than once or twice in a row. And that's north of York, so it's way up there. You're getting into disputed territory with the Scots. And she remained there, way up north, until her death. Now that abbey has been excavated, and you can go see the ruins. And it was in the Celtic style, and it was a double monastery. A double monastery is a monastery that includes both monks and nuns. And the Celtic style for this was not that they all lived together in one building. Whether it was a single-sex monastery or a double monastery, didn't matter. In the Celtic style, its members lived in very small houses, 2 or 3 to a house, and gathered for worship in the main building. In the double monastery, they lived in these small houses, men with men, women with women, but they all worshiped together. So it's a very different sort of feeling from the Roman style of monastery. Bede states that the original ideals of monasticism were strictly maintained by Hilda. All property and goods held in common, Christian virtues exercised, great emphasis on peace and charity between all those who lived in the monastery. And everyone had to attend some worship. Now, the monk's job really was to worship, to keep the hours. And they were required to do works of, good works of charity. So, now, when I say everyone who lived in the monastery, you need to understand a little bit about the monastery economics. The monasteries were like small villages. They not only were buildings, they had land, and they worked the land. They kept sheep, they kept goats. Well, I don't know about goats. They kept sheep, they kept cattle, and the land was worked. Well, who was doing the work? Not just the monks, or not just the monks and the nuns. There was something called confratres. Con means with, and fratres means brothers. These are people who were living in the monastery under the authority of the abbot or the abbess, but were not in holy orders, and they did most of the what we call labor, the unskilled labor or the skilled labor, the trades, in the monastery. Think of a medieval, what did they call it? Shoot, can't think of the word in English. I'm sorry. It was like in later on in the Middle Ages, if you had a castle, you didn't just have a castle. You had a whole bunch of peasants who were under you, and you had land around the castle and so forth. Same sort of thing. So they were an enterprise, all right? And the main business was farming, ranching, I guess you'd say, with sheep and cattle, and a lot of wood cutting. Wood was valuable for building, but also for burning. So there was a lot of that going on.
I have a question. So today, when you have the orders that have confraternities, is it the same concept?
Not exactly.
Okay.
I'm going to get to it,
Okay.
believe it or not. I'm glad to hear that because it means I'm not boring everybody. Okay. One of the more interesting things that happened during this period, there was a guy who was a cattle herder. His name was Cadman. And Cadman was at some sort of celebration in the monastery. I know some holy day or other. And the monks were between services. And they were sitting around having a little wine and passing around a harp and singing. And everybody was expected to sing. And he couldn't sing. He just couldn't. So he sneaked out and he went away. He went back to where the cattle were, out in the field at this point. And he had a dream. And in the dream, a man appeared to him and handed him a lyre, a harp, rather, and said, sing verses in praise of God. And in his dream, to his shock, he could. And when he woke up, he went back to the monastery, went to his overseer, and told him about the dream. And the overseer said, well, we ought to talk to the abbess about this. So he took Cadman to Hilda. And she said, bring this man a harp. And he could play it. And he could sing. And she said, you've got a gift and you've got a ministry, and now this is your job. Sing praises to God in your own words or others. And he did. And he was excellent. And Cadman wrote a lot of hymns that were used in the Celtic Church. And he went out, and he was sort of a musical missionary out around that area. Cadman, just like Bede is known as the father of English history, Cadman's known as the father of English poetry. Unfortunately, only one of his works has survived. And it is some think it's the oldest, others say it's the fourth oldest, and some say in between piece of English poetry that we have. Now, can I get up on the screen the picture of the Cadman Memorial? Aha. Okay. No, that's not the other one.
Not yet.
The whole memorial. Yeah. There we go. This is the Cadman Memorial. It was put up in the outside of Whitby in the 19th century, and it has various figures on it. And this is supposedly the spot where Cadman fell asleep with the cattle and had his dream. Now, could I have that other picture, please, which is this lowest panel here?
Back to Hilda?
Back to the one you just had before. Yeah, that one. Okay, here's Cadman. See his harp? Mm-hmm. And a cow. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's how we know it's Cadman. This is Hilda. There are 5 faces around her. Each of these faces is wearing a mitre. These are the 5 bishops the 5 people under her authority I think they were all monks to start with, who became bishops under her tutelage. And notice what she's got here.
Yeah.
You see that? Mm-hmm. Okay.
What is it?
It's like a crozier.
It's a crozier. Mm-hmm. That's what a bishop carries as a sign of his authority. Abbots had them too, and abbesses. Within the monastery, the abbot or the abbess had the same authority as a bishop, except an abbess had the same authority as a bishop, except because she wasn't in holy orders, she was in religious orders. She could not celebrate Mass, or there are certain things she couldn't perform liturgical functions, but she could preach, and she did. Hilda was very learned, and she got a reputation for wisdom that was so great that she would receive ambassadors from these various small kings coming to ask her advice on all sorts of questions. She would, and down here, you see some curly things. We'll talk about those later. Those are not, I don't know if you can see them or not.
Yeah. Those
are not just decorations. We'll talk about those later because those are really cool. Okay. The inscription on it is, I love this, to the glory of God and in memory of Cadman, father of English sacred song, fell asleep hard by AD 680. It doesn't mean that he fell asleep hard. It means he fell asleep near 680. Okay, that's a continues to be a Southernism, hard by, meaning very close to. Okay. With regard to the contratres, I will be speaking more about that when I get to Bede, okay, later. Bede writes, all who knew her called her mother because of her outstanding devotion and grace. She was a great believer in education, and particularly she thought everybody who was teachable should be taught. And she championed education for women in particular, which is part of her legacy today. But what she's really, really, really known for was the Synod of Whitby. Now, I've talked before about the differences between the Celtic Church and the Roman Church, and about how the two that we remember the most are the question of tonsure, how should monks cut their hair, and the question of how should we date Easter. The Celts used a lunar calendar, and the Christians used a calendar that had been approved at the Council of Nicaea all that long time ago, which is on the solar calendar. Now, the tonsure question seems trivial to us, and I don't know whether it seemed important to them or not. But the date of Easter was very, very important. This had been a Celtic Christian area, but the Roman faith had moved north, and it had really gotten a lot of impetus under Paulinus too. And so what you had was some churches following one rule, another following another rule about Easter. And some of the Northumbrian nobles saw this, and they wondered if they made a mistake here. It set up great concern. Do we really know? What if those other guys are right? What if we were wrong? There was much tension between the two groups. As far as we know, it didn't get to the point of violence, but they weren't terribly friendly. And some of the Northumbrian nobles were even beginning to consider, and maybe some already have, renouncing Christianity and going back to the old Celtic religion. Bede says, this dispute rightly began to trouble the minds and consciences of many people who feared that they might have received the name of Christ in vain. Oh. So they needed to get this settled one way or another. So in 664, the king of Northumbria, got him Oswy, or Oswy sometimes it's written, decided to settle him out once and for all. And he called a meeting of the leading churchmen and high-ranking nobles who were there primarily to see what was going on, I guess. And he decided to hold that meeting at Whitby so that Hilda would be there. apparently. Whitby is not a natural place to hold it. It's way up north. It's even north of York. You would think it would be in York, which was the capital, but no, it was held at Whitby. This is what's known as the Synod of Whitby. And Bishop Coleman from Lindisfarne and Bishop Agilbert with Agatho and Wilfrid led the two sides. Coleman, of course, from Lindisfarne, the Celts, Bishop Agilbert, the Romans. There were two deacons, James and Romanus, who supported the Roman side. Hilda supported the Celtic side. She had completely become Celticized, I guess. And there was there had to be a translator between the two parties because some of them didn't speak the same language, and not all the Celtic bishops spoke Latin. So Coleman presented the case for the Celts. And Wilfrid, a Northumbrian who had traveled to the continent, was now an abbot, spoke for the Romans. Notice there were bishops there, but they had an abbot doing the talking for them. Each one appealed to apostolic tradition. Coleman said, we are following the practice of St. John as maintained by St. Columba of Iona. This is what St. John wanted. Sir?
Were these groups also fighting with each other,
No.
or had things they agreed?
They agreed on the basics.
Basics?
But yes. No,
Okay.
they were not actually fighting.
Okay.
Wilfrid, representing the Roman side, called upon the authority of St. Peter. Okay. And when Oswy asked who was the gatekeeper of heaven, he quoted the Gospel of Matthew to him, where Jesus said, you are Peter, and upon this rock I shall build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, and to you I give the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Coleman could not cite any similar authority. So Oswy made his decision. And his decision was, this is from Bede. Peter is guardian of the gates of heaven, and I shall obey his commands to the best of my knowledge and ability. Otherwise, when I come to the gates of the kingdom, he who holds the keys may not be willing to open them. Now, notice what he said. He said, I will obey his commands to the best of my knowledge and ability. Essentially, he's not just saying we're going to keep Easter this way. He's saying I'm putting myself under the authority of the papacy in matters religious. That's the importance. The Celtic Church is now going to be absorbed largely into the Roman Church. Almost all of those who were there, including Hilda, said, okay, the king's the king, he's spoken, and by gosh, that makes sense too. Although Coleman and a few of his monks from Lindisfarne said, no, we're not going to accept this, and they took off. They went to a couple of places and finally wound up on Iona. Okay? Here we are back with St. Columba. And refused to conform to Roman practice, but most of the Celtic Church did. During the Synod, Hilda was the hostess and one of the leaders. She was a respected religious leader, and she played a lively role in the Synod. Now, she held out for the Celtic position. That's what she supported. But the fact that she accepted the decision that was made by the king and accepted Roman practice, which she knew a lot about. Remember, she'd been down south. So that was a major factor. It's sort of like, if any of you know your Southern history, it's sort of like General Lee after the Civil War. Okay, we did our best, but now this is a new situation and we're going to stick with it. So she becomes she remains an important and significant figure after this decision. This synod, in terms of the Christian faith in the British Isles, the importance of this synod really can't be overestimated. It resolved the disputes between the Celts and the Romans, and it brought the Northumbrian church, and Northumbria was one of the more important of these small kingdoms, into line with Roman traditions and Roman governance. They shifted the liturgy to Latin. The Celtic liturgy had been in the vernacular. They shifted it to Latin, of course, and that was an impetus to Latin literacy, education on the Latin model, and a stronger connection to European Christianity. So it not only is putting the two parts of English Christianity together, it's also drawing them closer to what's going on the continent. Hilda suffered from what was described as a fever for the last 7 years of her life, but she continued to work. She was an active abbess and undertook building projects and continued teaching. In her last year, the last year of her life, she set up another monastery. She started a couple. There is a legend that says that monastery's bells tolled at the moment of her death. She was 66 years old, which is not terribly old, but she had accomplished an enormous amount and really was one of the more dominant figures of the time in religious affairs. Her legacy is considerable. Her monastery became a major center for learning, producing scholars and bishops. I showed you the picture of the monument with the 5 bishops. Her encouragement and sponsorship of Cadman had a real effect on the English language as well as, on the traditional literature of the North, as well as a tremendous religious effect. It was good stuff. It's amazing how often we saw this with Ambrose, and you see it with lots of people. Think of Samuel Wesley. How often changes in religion or revivals of religion are accompanied by some sort of change in the musical use of the church. Now, you remember I called your attention to these little things down here? You're going to love this. This is a legend. It's not from Bede. It's a local legend that has survived. And boy, has it survived. It says there was a plague of snakes in the area. And Hilda turned them to stone. Okay? Now, in Whitby's a seaside place, okay? And there are a lot of fossils on the shore. Gwen knows where this is going, I'm sure. Including a lot of ammonites. Do you know what ammonites are?
Yeah.
They come in various sizes. They were a cephalopod. And they curl around themselves. We've got one at home that's about this big, right?
Right.
And Clint gave it to me. He picked it up. There's a place in Oklahoma where you can just go down to this lake, and they were scattered all over the place. They were very, very common. They're Jurassic period. Well, so you've got this legend. Local artisans would take these things and carve snakes' heads on the end of them and sell them to pilgrims. Okay? Now, in fact, there's one genus of ammonites is called Hildaceros, which means Hilda's thing. Okay? The coat of arms of Whitby includes 3 of these carved stones, stones with the head carved on them. And Durham's College of St. Hilda and St. Bede has ammonites on its shield. A carved ammonite stone is set in the wall by the entrance of the former chapel of St. Hilda's College in Durham. And the coat of arms of St. Hilda's College at Oxford includes a curved snake. And the ammonite is used as a symbol by the college. Hilda is considered one of the patron saints of learning and culture, including poetry, due to her patronage of Cadman and of education in general. St. Hilda's College, Oxford, was established in 1893 and named after her because it was established as a college for female students, which it was for more than 100 years. It's now open to men as well as women. The symbol of the college is an ammonite. And during the centenary, 100 silver ammonites were created and sold to alumni of the college in honor of St. Hilda's many achievements and those of the 100 years of female students on the college. The college's seal also bears its motto, non frustra vixi, I did not live in vain. Hilda's generally depicted with a pastoral staff and carrying a church, an abbey church, because she founded abbeys. Often there are ammonites, or sometimes snakes, all curled up, like ammonites, at her feet. So what happened to her abbey? She was succeeded by the widow of King Oswy, which gives you some idea how important her position was seen to be, and then by their daughter. We don't know anything about Whitby after that until 867, when the Vikings destroyed it. After the Norman conquest, it was refounded as a Benedictine house for men only, and it lasted until the dissolution of the monasteries by Henry VIII in 1539. Now, it should come as no surprise to you after you've heard his name so much that the second saint tonight is St. Bede, often referred to as the Venerable Bede. He was born in 672. Unlike Hilda, he was not born into a wealthy family. We know absolutely nothing about his family. Well, we know one thing. We know that at the age of 7, he was given to the monastery of St. Peter near Sunderland and entrusted to the care of the abbot, Bishop St. Benedict. Not our Benedict, somebody named after the earlier Benedict. Now, this means he was going to be one of the confratres, and I said I was going to talk more about what had happened with the confratres than I am. Not boys given to monasteries were later known as oblates, and the term oblate just means given, something that's given. They were children who were dedicated by their parents for religious education, and the assumption was that they would become monks, and most of them did. This was practiced from very early in the Benedictine order, and it provided a primary recruitment source. I mean, these little boys knew nothing of life. They were taken to the monastery at 7, and they were raised there. But there were always ethical concerns about this, because they weren't there by choice. The reason that you didn't bring them in under the age of 7, have you ever heard the term the age of discretion? Mm-hmm. The age of discretion is, in medieval terms, 7 years old, because that's when you're starting to be able to tell right from wrong. And there's an interesting thing. This age of 7 rule seems to have been widely understood in other cultures, and in Japan, up until World War II, it was the custom that children under the age of 7 were always dressed in red, a sort of special red coat. And they were never corrected for anything. They were never disciplined because they were too young to understand right from wrong. And so it must have been a rude awakening when they woke up on their 7th birthday and suddenly were. But the part that I really like about that custom is if you were lucky enough to live to the age of 70, you could put on the red coat again.
Oh.
True. Anyhow, but there was controversy about this. There were a lot of ethical concerns about it, and a lot of church councils tried to tried to make changes in it, and eventually they did. They got the rules changed slowly. Parents offer their sons typically at the age of 7. Occasionally they cheated and put them in earlier. And there would usually be one of 3 reasons for this. 1, you couldn't afford the child. You couldn't afford to raise it. Remember, these were hard times, okay? And so rather than have a starving child in your house, right, you'd know it would get fed and taken care of by the monks or by the monk. By the way, girls were often given to nunneries too, under the same sort of idea. Secondly, you wanted your child to have a better life or a better education, which they would get in many cases if you were a poor family. And finally, sometimes it was in fulfillment of a promise, a vow. God, if you'll do this for me, I'll give you and so that's what we did. The children lived within the monastery. They participated in daily prayer. They participated in work and learning. Basically, they were, what's the word? Shoot, I can't think of it. Apprentices. Yeah, they were apprentice monks, really, is what they were. And it was a major method for monasteries to grow. But, as I say, lots of church councils made changes in this. One of the first ones was they can leave at puberty. And eventually they started putting age limits on how low they could get. And the custom died out, obviously. Now today, you will hear the term oblates applied in a different way. Another term for oblates today is lay associates. That is, associates of the monastic order, but not in full vows themselves. Laymen or women, they can be married, they can be single, who affiliate with a monastic order, offering themselves to God and dedicate their lives to living the spirit of St. Benedict's rule and trying to integrate the principles of St. Benedict into secular life. They maintain a close relationship with the monastic community. They share in their prayer if they can. They usually take a vow to attend at least one spiritual retreat at the monastery a year. And some of their orders, they're also known as third order. I know the Benedictines have them, the Franciscans have them, the Dominicans have them. In some of these groups, they take a life vow. In some, they take a vow to be renewed every year. As they commit themselves to prayer, to charity, to support of the work of the monastery, and so forth. It's a serious commitment, but they don't leave their own homes or give up their own jobs. So the oblate concept transformed from a system of dedicating children to the monastic life into a form of lay spirituality. And it binds individuals into a monastic community while they are still living in the world. So anyhow, Bede, as a young boy, was given to this monastery. By 685, he'd been moved to a new monastery that had been founded from that monastery, known as the Monastery of St. Paul at Jarrow. We usually just refer to it as Jarrow. when the new head of the monastery was Ceolfrid, who was made the abbot, and Bede, who was 13 or 14 years old. This was in 686. Bede went with him because he had been particularly committed to the care of Ceolfrid, who was a noted scholar. And Ceolfrid had been impressed by his dedication to scholarship. That was in 685. Sorry, I said 686. 685. In 686, the plague hit. The plague hit the monastery. We don't know how many monks were living there at that time or how many other people were living there at that time. I have seen estimates as low as 50 monks and as high as 200. There were some big monasteries. The plague hit pretty hard, and people started dying. The monks took care of them, and the monks died. Don't know how many died, but we know how many survived.
Is this the bubonic plague?
No, we don't know what plague it was.
Okay.
Two out of all the monks in the abbey lived. One was the abbot, Ceolfrid. And the other, obviously, was Bede, who was 13 or 14 years old. These two monks alone, for months, maintained all of the monastic offices of prayer, just the two of them, to keep the monastery in business, to keep doing what it was doing. Bede was ordained a deacon when he was 19 years old. That was contrary to canon. He was too young. He was supposed to be 25, I think, was minimum age for ordination. But it was obviously waived in his case. I think he proved his devotion. And he was priested when he was 30, which is about young as possible. He never seems to have moved more than 70 miles, gone anywhere more than 70 miles away from Jarrow. He went to Lindisfarne, he went to York. That's about it. His remains were, when he died, his remains were taken to Durham, and they're now in the Galilee Chapel at Durham Cathedral. People go to Durham Cathedral for a number of reasons. It's a fascinating building, for one thing. If you're on if it's a pilgrimage group, they're probably mostly going to see Cuthbert, the tomb of St. Cuthbert, who was a Celtic Christian who was at Lindisfarne. And Cuthbert's tomb is really pretty impressive. It's a great big slab with 3 words on it. Hic est Cuthbertus. Here is Cuthbert. That's it. That's all that needs to be said. Now, this is the tomb of Bede. I don't know, can this be made any larger, maybe? That doesn't necessarily matter. What you see here, this is a prayer desk. Here's where the body is. And then behind it, you see this sculpture. Great, thank you. Okay. This is the sculpture on the wall. It's words. I'll read them to you in a bit. And this is the slab, which has the original dedication, the original inscription on it. And I will talk about this later. Now, what about Bede? Why is he so important? Well, I've talked about the history of the English people, but Bede's work falls into 3 different groups. He was a prolific writer. He wrote about 40 books. Some are grammatical and sort of scientific, descriptions of birds and trees and stuff. Scriptural commentary and the historical and biographical. He includes instruction. These are intended to teach you something. Spelling, hymns, figures of speech, types of verse, collections of epigrams. He was fascinated by the concept of time and wrote very interestingly about time, what it is, how it is. And he did it actually twice. He wrote two, one in 703, one in 725. These books were very concerned with, guess what? How do we know the date of Easter? That was still an important question. There wasn't a controversy about it, but people were interested in it. His earliest biblical commentary, and this is surprising, was on the book of Revelation. Most biblical commentators start either with an Old Testament book or a gospel. And they're similar to modern commentaries, but not exactly the same. A modern commentary will almost always go through the whole text of the book in question. He didn't do that. His aim was to transmit and explain what he considered to be the important, spiritually relevant passages from the fathers of the church. So he would write, here's part of the Revelation of St. John, here's what one of the early church fathers said about it, and here's what I say about it. His interpretations were mainly allegorical, looking into the biblical text for symbolism as the deeper meanings. But it is interesting in that he does issue criticisms where he sees contradictions. He tries to rationalize those discrepancies. And he really has a serious, very serious approach to Scripture. This was what made him famous in his own day, was his scriptural work. And he was famous. He corresponded with popes. He corresponded with St. Alcuin, who was Charlemagne's main chaplain, I guess you'd call it. And he was considered to be the number one scholar in all of Europe in his day. This is a guy who's a monk, who's never been more than 70 miles from where he is. It's all done by paper and no computers. It's interesting in that these works, the works based on Scripture, are, except without any critical eye, accounts of miracles. Whereas in others of his books, like his History of the Abbots, Lives of the Abbots, he is very skeptical and very critical about the idea of miracle, not the concept of miracles, but any given miracle that's claimed. Bede's influence on English and foreign scholarship was very, very great. It probably would have been greater, but within less than a century after he was dead, the Danish Vikings really started tearing Northumbria apart, and much was lost in those ways. But Bede is not like most of the contemporary writings that we have from that period in a couple of ways. He is moderate. He takes a broad view of a lot of things. He will give you both sides of a controversy without saying, these were the angels of light and these were the demons of darkness. He'll tell you what it was. He doesn't necessarily condemn that with which he does not agree. One of the most remarkable things about him is that there was no sense of copyright in those days. No sense of literature as property. I mean, I might own a book, but the author didn't, okay? Once he sold it to me, it was mine. I could do anything I wanted to it. And they copied freely from each other, as we all know. And that had been the case since classical times. But Bede is one of the very, very first to show a sense of literary property. It's really quite extraordinary. It's something new. When he wrote, if he copied something or use something as a source, he would write in not only what the source was, but a plea to anyone who copied it to include that, which they didn't always. We have copies of Bede that don't have that. But he wanted to give credit to those from whom he had learned. Bede was a scholar to the teeth. He was a man of high culture. He understood, he was familiar. His Latin is very good. I'll talk about his Latin in a minute. And he makes references to many older writers who were available only in Latin. But he repeatedly and explicitly or implicitly makes it clear that all of his studies were less important than the interpretation of Scripture. That was the heart and soul of what he was doing. He wrote, Holy Scripture is above all other books, not only by its authority, because it is divine, or by its utility, because it leads to eternal life, but also by its antiquity and its literary form. This is good stuff here. This is not like some of the earlier guys who had despised classical learning. What has Rome to do with, what has Athens to do with Jerusalem? This is an appreciation of Scripture as both revelation and literary composition. It's amazing, really, that he had such an uncompromising sense of the importance of Scripture that he was so well educated in non-scriptural culture. He really was. Now, of course, in his day, Latin was still being spoken. It was being spoken by the learned. It was a living language. But he doesn't do what so many of the medievals did. So many of them would say, I want to write like the Augustan age writers. I want to write like Cicero. I want to write like those guys who generally were very flowery, very concerned to show you how much they knew. It was elaborate and very, very highly formalized. But his literary style was more like St. Augustine or Venantius Fortunatus. It was not over flowery. It could be poetic at times, even if he was writing prose, but he was really concerned with getting the truth onto the paper, so that it could come off the paper without anybody being overly impressed by his style rather than the content of what he was trying to communicate. His language is kind of pure in its way. It's clear, it's lucid, and it's balanced. It's sober, it's moderate. It's particularly when he gets into historical matters. Really fine. During his lifetime and through the whole medieval period, Bede's reputation was based primarily on two things: his commentaries on Scripture and his book of sermons, most of which he did write. Now, we think some of them were attributed to him, but not written by him. The style's just too different. Later copyists, people took great liberties in copying, frankly. But later, when history began to become a serious matter, Bede's ecclesiastical history became absolutely vital. It is the standard reference still to this day on the history of not only Christianity, but of many non-religious events and issues that were taking place among the Anglo-Saxon tribes and among the Lake Britons. The title most often used for Bede is venerable. And you'll hear it always, or almost always, people will refer to him as the Venerable Bede. Venerable means that to which respect is due. And he was just incredibly respected in his own day. But the term wasn't used in his own day. Never was. There's a legend about how he came to be the Venerable Bede. Don't know whether it's true or not. But the legend is that there was a monk. One of the writers of the legend refers to him as a dunce, who's given the job of composing the epitaph for Bede. You know, what are we going to put on Bede's grave? And he just couldn't come up with anything. He was tearing his hair out. I mean, this is the most important thing he'd ever do in his whole life, probably. And he just was struggling until he fell asleep. And when he awoke, he discovered that the words were already written on the stone. Hac sunken fossa bida venerabilis ossa. In this grave are the bones of the Venerable Bede. Okay. That's what's written here. Now, this is not the original grave. He was originally buried at the monastery, but when the monastery had to be abandoned because of the Vikings, they moved his bones to Durham Cathedral. This was put up in the 1970s. I wish I could have gotten you a better picture of it. It's just words, okay? Latin above, English below. The words of Bede's. Christ is the morning star, hallelujah, who, when the night of this world is past, hallelujah, brings to his saints the promise of the light of life, hallelujah, and opens everlasting day, hallelujah. To him.
It's beautiful.
And yeah, it's lovely. And it's very typical of Bede's style. There's no floweriness in it. There's no sort of, flowery language. It's heartfelt. It's real. Bede was recognized locally as a saint, but he wasn't officially canonized until 1899. Mm-hmm. He was also declared a doctor of the church. And I've talked about the 38 doctors of the church. 39 doctors of the church. You know how many of them are English?
39.
One.
Bede. He's the only Englishman who is remembered as a doctor of the church. He's recognized as a doctor of the church. And I want to read you two things. Well, maybe a little more. This is the ending of the ecclesiastical history. Thus much concerning the ecclesiastical history of Britain, and especially of the race of the English. I, Bede, a servant of Christ and a priest of the monastery of the blessed apostles St. Peter and St. Paul, which is at Wearmouth and at Yarra in Northumberland, have, with the Lord's help, composed, so far as I could gather it, either from ancient documents or from the tradition of the elders or from my own knowledge. I was born in the territory of said monastery, and at the age of 7 I was, by the care of my relations, given to the most Reverend Abbot Benedict, and afterwards to Chiofrid, to be educated. From that time I have spent the whole of my life within that monastery, devoting all my pains to the study of the Scriptures, and amid the observance of monastic discipline, and the daily charge of singing in the church, it has been ever my delight to learn or teach or write. In my 19th year, I was admitted to the diaconate, in my 30th to the priesthood, both by the hands of the Most Reverend Bishop John, and at the bidding of Abbot Geoffrey. From the time of my admission to the priesthood to my present 59th year, I have endeavored for my own use and that of my brethren to make brief notes upon the Holy Scripture, either out of the works of the venerable fathers or in conformity with their meaning and interpretation. At this point, he gives his own bibliography, the things he has written. And then he finally concludes with this. And I pray thee, loving Jesus, that as thou hast graciously given me to drink in with delight the words of thy knowledge, so thou wouldst mercifully grant me to attain one day to thee, the fountain of all wisdom, and to appear forever before thy face. Now, I mentioned Cuthbert. That was Cuthbert of Lindisfarne. There was another Cuthbert who was one of Bede's students. He was a monk, young monk, who was one of Bede's students. And he wrote, I can with truth declare that I never saw with my eyes or heard with my ears anyone return thanks so unceasingly to the living God. Even on the day of his death, the eve of the Ascension in 735, the saint was still busy dictating a translation of the Gospel of St. John. In the evening, the boy Wilbur, now Wilbur later went on to become a monk, but he was one of the boys who began. He was serving as a secretary scribe. The boy Wilbur, who was writing it, said to him, there is still one sentence, dear master, which is not written down. And when this had been supplied, and the boy had told him it was finished, thou hast spoken truth, Bede answered, it is finished. Take my head in thy hands. He's lying in bed, okay? I think he wants him to lift him up. Take my head in thy hands, for it much delights me to sit opposite any holy place where I used to pray, that so sitting I may call upon my Father. And thus upon the floor of his cell, sitting, singing, glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Ghost, and the rest, he peacefully breathed his last breath. Bede was a remarkable human being. He had remarkable for his gifts, remarkable for his attitudes, remarkable for his accomplishments. I can think of many worse and few better role models for any Christian. Bede was happy in his life. Bede was accomplished. He had great literary gifts, but he also did the rest of the work of the monks. He was not arrogant. He was not mean. He was an altogether wonderful human being. And he is sainted, I think, obviously, primarily for his influence on Western Christian scholarship. But even had he not been sainted for that, I think I would still be very happy to be able to aspire to be what he was. Not a monk, but a Christian person. So that is it for the evening. And I must admit, Bede is another of those people to whom I feel a great attraction. And he's one of the ones from the 7th century who's a bit easier to get a sense of who he is. It's like Benedict, his personality comes through his writings. And so those are our two saints of the evening. And I promise you, I'll get us out of Northumbria next time. I think we're moving around geographically as well as...
Bring us.
Yeah.
Could you tell me again the name of the chapel or the church in which he's buried? What is the name of
Durham
it?
Cathedral.
Durham Cathedral.
Yeah, give me a minute. I need to get that. I'll be right back. Well, at least I don't have a nosebleed tonight. Yeah, Gwen and I went to Durham. There it is. Gwen and I went to Durham a long time ago. Very impressed with it.
And the words that are written on the wall, would we be able to find that online? That's just so beautiful. I'd like to have a copy of it.
Yeah.
Actually.
Sure, I'll give you my copy.
Oh, okay.
I forget who translated it. Doesn't matter really, but it really is lovely.
That's beautiful.
Father, am I correct in understanding that Bede grew up in the Celtic tradition as opposed to the Roman?
Let's see.
His relationship with Hilda and
No, it would have been Roman because he was born. He was only 8 years old when she died.
okay.
So yeah, it had. Where is it? I'm
I
looking.
have another question to ask. Years ago, this had to be probably easily 40 years ago, I had a collection of history books. It was the Cambridge History of the World, and they had little individual pamphlets. And they had one of the pamphlets was on Lindisfarne. And I the series was not in any way religious, but I came away with the feeling that somehow there was a loss because the Celtics had been wiped out in a sense by the Romans. And I don't know whether that's justified. I'm listening to this.
No, they were not wiped out.
I don't mean wiped out in terms of death, but just that they
Oh, you mean
they just absorbed it and the one became less important and just kind of died out.
It never really died out. I mean, remember when we talked about Patrick, all of those strange customs around Patrick and even more strange customs around St. Bridget, those are all Celtic. And certain aspects, I think, of the Celtic culture, let's put it that way, still exist. Celts, it was very much an oral culture. Remember, only the Druids were okay. And think of how many writers and playwrights and poets and songwriters have come out of Ireland and Wales.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And there is, there's this great now literary tradition, but this love of language, very Celtic. There are customs that still hold, that are still held in Scotland, in Wales, in Ireland. They differ because the Celts were never really, never a unit. But I think the culture survived to some degree, and even the language survived to some degree. There are still, the Gaelic is still spoken in some parts of Scotland. Pardon me?
And Wales.
And Wales. Well, actually, yeah, they call it Welsh, but it's it's pretty much Gaelic. And even Brittany in France. So I wouldn't say that it was completely destroyed, but it was to some degree displaced and driven out into the less, out of the cities.
I think there was a hint in the series that somehow something really great had been lost because it had been taken over by the Roman thing. I don't know if that's even justified, but I hadn't even thought about it until tonight's lecture.
It's hard to say because what we know, what we know about the Celts was mostly written by Romans. And Greeks, because the Greeks knew certainly they were seen as superior metal workers, and they had an artistic tradition that was quite different from the classical tradition. So I don't know. there's good. Oh, this sounds so weak. There are good things and bad things in most cultures, as far as I know. I don't know of any perfect ones or any completely evil ones. But the picture we have of the Celts, I don't think is that it's wrong to think of them as, sort of fur-wearing barbarians. That was the Germans. But it's hard to know because by and large they didn't build in stone. By and large they built in wood. So it's hard to know as much about their architecture. And the fact that everything was memorized rather than written down. There are two types of oral tradition. One, and it's practiced in some parts of the world, is where the oral tradition is memorized word for word. You have to have it word perfect. And the other is, well, I tell you, and you tell her, and you tell him, and by the time it gets around to Claude, it may not be the way it started. Okay? And that's what the Celts have. So this is why you get a lot of conflicting stories. And there are all kinds of figures in Celtic history who, like O'Neill of the Seven Hostages, who was the first king of the line that Columba was related to. People will refer to him as a semi-mythical king. Yeah, that's pretty good. He's probably for real, but we don't have any documentation. We don't, If you want to be remembered as a culture, you got to learn two things. You got to learn to build in stone, and you got to learn to write. Otherwise, in 3 generations, it's going to be, let me tell you about, and it'll be a story. And maybe it's a true story, and maybe it's not. I tend to think there are a lot of these stories floating around in every culture that have a kernel of truth wrapped up in a lot of fancy dress, like the Trojan War. Ma'am.
Bede's ecclesiastical history, was that of Britain alone, or was it of Europe in general, or what?
No, of the English people.
Thank you. Okay.
That's what he said, the ecclesiastical history of the English people. I really like Bede. For some reason, it amused my seminary classmates to always refer to him as the venomous Bede. and he was as far from venomous as any human being can be. Surely y'all have heard that. No? Okay.
Since you mentioned venomous, I noticed that lots of shields and different things had snakes on them. I always think of snakes as evil, bad, but were they protectors on your shield to help you fight? Or
well, it depends on what period we're talking about. In the classical world, snakes were not a symbol of evil. Exactly. They meant danger,
right.
But they also were seen as messengers to and from the underworld because they lived in the holes in the ground. So they became a symbol of hidden wisdom. And there was there's a lot of snakeology.
Snakeology.
A lot of mythology about snakes. And it depends on which culture you're talking about. In Norse mythology, there was the worm. Worm was a word that was used for snakes too. Ouroboros. And everything depended upon the tree, this great tree, Yggdrasil. And the worm was eating at the roots of the tree, and eventually the end of all things would come. The worm was a symbol of the Ouroboros worm, that snake, the great snake, was seen as a sort of destructive force and not much else to them. But it can mean different things. It's very...
Is that the snake of Adam and Eve?
Pardon me?
You said a great big snake.
Well, a mythic snake. They're eating at the tree of life.
Got it. Never mind.
But I love that bit with the Ammonites. What I really like about it, and this is just a riff, a riff on Christian culture, as I wish it would be. Everybody knows that the Ammonites got carved in, had snake heads carved on them in order to gull the tourist, all right, the pilgrim, and yet all these places have accepted that, hey, this is cool. We're going to put Ammonites on our seal. We're going to put Ammonites on our flag. We're going I find that, it's
Right.
good natured. It's sort of, we can laugh at ourselves.
Popular.
We can laugh at ourselves. And it is kind of funny. Or I think it is, anyhow. Okay, well, thank you all for being here. We're a little thin on the ground tonight. Which is kind of sad because these are two of my favorites. Sometimes I have to fight hard to find things that I think will be interesting enough, but these are two that I really, really take seriously. And partly because I think as an Anglican Catholic, I really value the English culture, the British cultural tradition. And these two people are really very important parts of it. They were important in their own day, and they've been important to scholarship and ever since. Oh, by the way, St. Hilda is the patron of any number of schools around the world. A number of them are girls' schools, which figures, including the National Cathedral School for Girls.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
So, she is not forgotten. And I think her motto, the motto that is described as important for her, I have not lived in vain. Boy, that's really good.
Yeah.
That's really good. So, I'm big on Hilda, but I'm even bigger on Bee. And if you ever get to Durham, you should go. Go to who's been to Durham? Gwen and I. Anybody else?
No?
Okay. Durham Cathedral, the river curves around like this, and the cathedral is built there. So there's bluffs on three sides, and it looks like a fortress. Okay, it's not one of these wedding cake Gothics. All right, it sits up there like this. It's the most warrior-looking cathedral you will ever see. And one English poet described it as half church of God, half fortress against the Scots. Yeah, it is true. Because it was built up there as, if the Scots get this far south, and Durham's not all that far, this is where we're going to go. This is where we're going to hold out now. So yeah, that's a great line. But Durham is really impressive. The cathedral itself, ma'am.
All right, I'm not sure if I'm off on one of Gwen's rabbit holes or not. But Lindisfarne Gospel.
Yes.
You've mentioned.
Yes, Lindisfarne is an island.
Okay.
Actually, there's a religious community there now.
Okay.
But it's not a formal monastic community. It's sort of like the Iona community.
Okay.
Okay. And it was the wealthiest monastery in Britain. It really was. And the Vikings knew that. The Lindisfarne Gospel was produced there. That's why it's Lindisfarne.
This is the one with all of the illustrations and.
Right. Lots of which look very Celtic.
Okay.
Lots of curly hues and yes, that Lindisfarne, like Jarrow, was a center of scholarship, and it was pretty much totally destroyed.
By the Vikings?
Yeah, and that's why Cuthbert's bones and Cuthbert's bones were taken.
But that volume is where? I mean, there.
I think it's in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, but I'm not sure.
I've seen, art history books.
Yeah,
because
it's really serious. Lindisfarne Gospel. Oh, come on. Let's
Like
see.
cheese or something.
Created around 700.
Okay.
And we actually know the monk who did it. I know his name. Held by the British Library. Sorry, it's not the Bohemian. Famous for its stunning carpet pages and elaborate interlacing. Showing exceptional craftsmanship and cultural fusion, blending Celtic, Mediterranean, and Germanic styles.
Well, and it's also there's seasons and there are all sorts of things that pop into it, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. La 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 la.
La, la, la.
Yeah. Includes sorry, housed and exhibited by the British Library.
Okay.
So you can see it. They won't let you turn the pages though.
You just have to look at
You have to come back every day and let them, yeah.
And let them flip it over.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Page of the week.
Sir.
So, how much of your knowledge about Bede have you presented tonight? Do you have more information on him?
Not really. I think I pretty much dumped a whole load. I'm trying to think.
I was just going to suggest that if you did have more, I'd love to see you do just something on Bede one time and cover everything that you know about him, because it's very interesting.
He really is. And it just, I find his character so appealing. And I mean, I would respect him for, he would still be venerable, worthy of respect. I would respect him even had he been a crotchety old dude, but he wasn't. And his you can tell by the language, his language, but also by the language of the people who wrote about him, who knew him. You know, let's face it, you're a monk in a big scholarly monastery, you're going to have a lot of people around you who know how to write. And some of them are going to do it. And I mean, you heard what his guy Cosper talked about it, and how Wilfred speaks to him, and he doesn't address him by some term of his rank or whatever. He calls him dear master. He was much respected and much loved in his own time.
Is his ecclesiastical history still available?
It's available in English, and it is not hard to read. Now, it's got a lot of funny names in it. Those Celtic names are weird. But Bede's style is, I would describe it as straightforward and unadorned. It's not hard reading. It's not like reading Thucydides in English. I mean, it translates well. That's another reason to write simply if you're trying to get across. If somebody's going to translate your language and you're using a lot of fancy similes and terms of speech that are common only to your language, man, it's going to be hard to translate it. A literal translation of anything idiomatic always sounds really stupid. But, no, it really does. I mean, we use idioms all the time, as well we should. But generally speaking, they don't translate terribly well. And this is one of, some of y'all know this story, but it's too good not to tell. Concerning the dangers of translation. There was a bishop in South Africa in the 19th century who was very concerned about the fact that there was no Bible for the Zulus unless they could speak English or Afrikaans. They weren't going to speak Latin or Greek. So he set out to learn Zulu and write a Zulu Bible, which he did. But he had the help of a Zulu who also spoke English to some degree. And he got to the point of Christ's crucifixion. And the part where they lift up a sponge on a reed with what's usually translated as sour wine, but really shouldn't be, or vinegar. Okay. And he realized he didn't know the Zulu word for sponge. So he asked the Zulu. He said, "What's your word for sponge?" The guy said, "I don't know what a sponge is. What's a sponge?" He says, "What do you wash with?" And the guy told him. Okay. What do you wash your skin with? He told him. So that's the word he used. The Zulus, at that point, unless they were trading for it, they didn't have cloth. They didn't make cloth. They wore skins. They scrubbed themselves with rocks.
It was
rough
pumice.
rocks,
Yeah.
like a pumice stone. Yeah. So even while we were there in the 1970s, the Zulu Bible still said that they held up a rock stuck on a reed, which uses to, for the wine, because that's the word. Translating from one culture to another can be very difficult. So if you keep your language simple and direct, you're likely to be able to get it across better. I was so impressed while we were there. I had a parishioner who was married to the daughter of one of the theologians who was working on the Zulu Bible. He was a Lutheran missionary, and they were doing this thing slowly and releasing books one book at a time. But one reason why it was so slow, before a text could be accepted, it had to be accepted by 3 different committees. One was a committee of theologians, one was a committee of linguists, and one was a committee of Zulu authors, poets and fiction writers, because they wanted it to be the literary standard, just like the King James became.
Wow.
And I assume they finished it. They didn't. They're into the second generation of people doing it. But I was so impressed by the fact that they were being really careful this time. They didn't want any more rocks on the reeds.
Gutenberg as well.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Translation is always tough. Some languages translate more easily than others. Latin translates into English quite nicely. But again, you do have idioms, and you do have things like that if you use them literally, they don't make any sense at all. But a native speaker would know immediately what they meant. This is true even in modern languages, much less ancient ones. Okay, well, thank you all very much. And
Thank you.
we will not meet next week because that's meeting. Sorry about that. Yeah, you and I'll be here. But yeah, and Rick and Martha. We got most of the vestries here. Well, thank you all very much. I can't figure how much it means to me to be able to do this. And there wouldn't be any point in doing it if it weren't for you all here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, is this? I have seen it. And I wish I was still in the money.
But I need to throw my